When we moved into Maplewood Estates, I thought we were escaping chaos. The suburban neighborhood offered white picket fences, tightly manicured lawns, and the kind of silence you'd expect from a gated community monitored by a vigilant homeowners association. I thought it would be safe for my daughter, Ellie. She's 12 years old, nonverbal, and lives with cerebral palsy. After years of unpredictable landlords, unsafe apartments, and neighbors who weren't patient with difference, this felt like peace. Until we met Karen Whitmore. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the president of the HOA, and she wielded that title like a weapon. 50-something, platinum blonde, always in tennis skirts and wraparound sunglasses, she patrolled the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff. People avoided her. Some even feared her. I didn't, at least not at first. The trouble began with a ramp. Ellie's condition meant she couldn't navigate stairs. So I hired a contractor to build a modest wooden ramp along the side of our house. Nothing flashy, just something functional, so I could wheel her down to the backyard. Within 24 hours of its installation, a pink notice was taped to our door. Unauthorized exterior modifications are subject to review by the Architectural Committee. Immediate removal required. I called the number on the notice, thinking it was a mistake. Karen answered. "It's not personal," she said, her tone saccharine. "It's just protocol. We can't have the neighborhood looking like a trailer park." "It's a mobility ramp," I said slowly, forcing calm into my voice. "It's for my disabled daughter." "I understand your situation," Karen replied. "But rules are rules. You should have submitted a proposal. There's a whole process." "I'm not taking it down." A pause. "Then, you'll regret that decision." And with that, the war began. Karen's first tactics were small. We received violation notices for absurd things: grass being a quarter-inch too tall, a flower pot placed outside the designated aesthetic zone, near the porch. Then my trash bins were mysteriously left overturned. One morning, I found sidewalk chalk drawings Ellie and I had done washed away with what smelled like bleach. Still, I held out. My daughter needed the ramp, and if it meant enduring Karen's petty campaign, so be it. But then came the cameras. One morning, I noticed a motion-activated camera installed on the tree just inside Karen's yard, pointed directly at her home. Then another popped up on the opposite side. It wasn't just paranoia. Footage of Ellie in our yard ended up posted in a private HOA Facebook group Karen moderated. "They're not monitoring your daughter," a sympathetic neighbor, Lisa, confided. "They're building a case. Karen says you're violating the unsupervised minors in common areas rule." "She's not unsupervised," I snapped. "She's in a wheelchair in a fenced yard." "I know, but that woman is obsessed, and people are afraid to stand up to her." Ellie was unaware of the mounting pressure, or maybe she just didn't show it. Her world was full of colors, textures, and quiet sounds. Her favorite thing was the wind chime that hung from the maple tree near the back fence. She'd sit for hours listening to it, laughing whenever the wind danced just right. She brought peace. Karen brought fury. Then came the day I wasn't home. I'd gone out for 45 minutes, just to pick up a prescription and groceries. Ellie was in her usual place in the backyard, seated securely in her wheelchair under the shaded canopy, a baby monitor on, and the gate locked. When I returned, I found the backyard empty. Panic ripped through me like electricity. I dropped the bags, screaming her name, running through the house, then out the front door, only to see flashing red and blue lights. 2 police cruisers were parked in front of Karen's home. A small crowd had gathered. And there, in the center of it all, was Ellie, inside a metal dog kennel, covered with a sun tarp, her face pale and wet with tears. I ran. A female officer stepped in front of me. "Ma'am, we need you to stay back." "She's my daughter." There was shouting. Accusations. Karen stood to the side, arms crossed, lips curled in smug satisfaction. She was unattended in a potentially hazardous environment, she said to the officer, who was scribbling notes. The gate was open. She could have rolled into the street. I had no choice but to contain the situation. "She's not a dog," I screamed, tears blurring my vision. The officers eventually let me take Ellie inside. She trembled in my arms. Not from cold, but from fear. The next day, I contacted the police department, an attorney, and filed a formal complaint. But it wasn't so simple. Karen claimed she'd acted under the HOA's emergency safety clause, which allowed members to intervene in situations presenting imminent harm to residents or property. She presented edited footage from her security cameras, showing the gate swinging slightly open. But neighbors began to talk. Lisa shared a video, one that had been deleted from the Facebook group. It showed Karen entering my yard, unlocking the gate with what looked like a key, and wheeling Ellie's chair across the lawn herself. There was no open gate, no danger, just a calculated abduction. I took the footage to the authorities. And for once, they listened. Karen Whitmore was arrested 2 days later on charges of unlawful imprisonment, endangerment of a disabled minor, and trespassing. She didn't go quietly. Cameras captured her shrieking at officers, accusing them of falling for the sob story and letting degeneracy lower property values. It made the local news. Suddenly, neighbors who'd once turned a blind eye were speaking out. Stories of intimidation, threats, and behind-the-scenes bullying surfaced. Lisa organized a petition to dissolve the HOA's current leadership. Within a week, Karen's name was stripped from the sign at the clubhouse. But even as the charges mounted, and Karen's once glossy image collapsed under the weight of her cruelty, something in me remained unsettled. Because justice isn't just about arrests. It's about the scars that stay behind. The days following Karen Whitmore's arrest were eerily still, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Her porch, once an epicenter of HOA gossip, manicured blooms, and passive-aggressive clipboard patrols, sat abandoned. The roses drooped. The sprinklers hissed without purpose. The flag she proudly hoisted every morning now hung limp in the wind. But peace didn't follow her departure. It's strange how trauma can echo even after the source is gone. Ellie wouldn't leave her room. She stared at the wall for hours, eyes unfocused. When I tried to wheel her outside, even just to the porch, she'd go stiff with fear. Her wind chime sat silent. Her laughter had vanished. I took time off work. I rearranged the house to make everything even more accessible. I brought in therapists. I tried music, touch, old cartoons she used to love. Nothing helped. It was like someone had reached into my little girl's soul and snuffed out the light. That's when the guilt set in. Not just guilt that I'd left her alone that day, but guilt that I had brought us to this place at all. I had thought Maplewood Estates would be our safe haven. But in truth, I had misjudged the sickness that can thrive beneath pretty surfaces and painted fences. And I wasn't alone. Lisa was the first neighbor to come by. She brought lasagna, 2 bottles of water, and a printout of the official HOA bylaws, highlighted, tabbed, and annotated. "We need to talk," she said, brushing past me into the living room. I raised an eyebrow. "You're starting a book club?" She gave a humorless chuckle. "A mutiny." Over the next hour, she explained what I had only begun to suspect. Karen's control over the HOA wasn't just about power trips and petty violations. It was a regime. For the last 5 years, she had systematically manipulated elections, stacked the board with loyalists, and changed language in the bylaws to give herself sweeping authority. She even rewrote sections to let her approve emergency spending without votes, Lisa said. Last year, she spent $3,000 of HOA funds on a security drone. For the neighborhood? No. For her backyard. She said she had a gut feeling about intruders. I blinked. And people let her get away with this? Lisa looked down, ashamed. We were scared. She'd threaten fines, start rumors, even contact employers. The Johnsons down the block had to move because she called CPS on them after a barbecue ran past curfew. Now, though, the curtain had lifted. Karen's arrest had emboldened the residents. A town hall was called. It was packed. Some came angry, others apologetic. Some, like me, came simply to listen. I stood in the back, holding Ellie's tablet so she could watch her favorite ocean documentary on mute. She remained expressionless. Lisa stood at the front, microphone in hand. "We let this happen," she said. "And now someone got hurt. A child." A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. She locked a little girl in a cage. Lisa continued, voice trembling. And we did nothing until it made the news. That word, cage, hung in the air like smoke. No one interrupted. Not even the board members who had once backed Karen. Everyone was quiet, shamed, until a voice called out from the back. She's still in the group chat. Heads turned. Murmurs returned. Lisa raised the mic. What do you mean? She's still in the HOA board chat. She's been sending messages. I didn't want to say anything because I thought it was fake, but he trailed off, and a woman next to him pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen, eyes wide. She's threatening to sue. Says she'll bring the whole neighborhood down. Claims she has allies. A chill crawled up my spine. Of course she did. The next morning, my mailbox was pried open. Inside, wedged between a takeout menu and a water bill, was a manila envelope with no return address. I opened it on the porch, under the same tree where Ellie used to sit. Inside were 4 photos. The first showed Ellie in her wheelchair from behind, her head tilted up toward the sky. The second was zoomed in through a window from inside her house. The third showed me, asleep on the couch. The fourth was a single page, printed in bold, blocky font. You can destroy a woman's reputation, but you can't silence what she knows. Sleep tight. I nearly dropped the envelope. My hands shook. Karen was behind bars, or at least still under house arrest pending trial. But someone else was continuing her campaign. That night, I installed a full security system. Motion detectors. Floodlights. Internal locks. I slept on the floor beside Ellie's bed. Whatever peace we thought we had gained, it was still under siege. Then came the retaliation from within. 3 days later, I received a notice from the HOA. An official violation. Unapproved lighting installations. Your new floodlights are in violation of neighborhood aesthetics. Fines will accumulate daily until resolution. It was signed not by Karen but by Philip Green, interim HOA president. Philip was a name I barely recognized, but Lisa filled me in. He was one of Karen's original appointees. Quiet, mild-mannered, rarely spoke, but deeply loyal. He's the one she used to delegate the dirty work to, Lisa said grimly. He's probably been her lapdog for years. The next notice came 2 days later. Unattended refuse containers. Failure to adhere to disposal policy. $150 fine. Then another. Unauthorized signage. Political sticker on vehicle window. I was being bled. Not just emotionally, but financially. Every day I had to choose between fighting these fines or focusing on Ellie. And she, still so silent, was beginning to flinch at every knock on the door. Lisa and I weren't alone, though. More neighbors began to resist. There were signs taped to street lamps, "Down with the board." An anonymous Instagram account began posting clips of Karen's past speeches, edited side by side with HOA documents to expose her lies. Someone egged Philip Green's car. I won't say it was right, but I understood the anger. Then, unexpectedly, Ellie spoke. It was only one word. It happened during a particularly windy morning. The kind that made the old wind chimes sing like a choir. I had wheeled her into the living room, playing the soft documentary music she liked. I stepped away for just a moment, and then I heard her say, clear and quiet, "Chime." I froze. Tears welled up in my eyes as I rushed back in, dropping to my knees beside her. "What did you say, baby?" She didn't repeat it, but she looked at the window, then at me, and then her lips curved. Just a little, but enough. It was a crack in the ice, a signal that the light was still in there. And just like that, I stopped being afraid. That night, I wrote a letter. It wasn't to the HOA. It was to the press. I laid everything bare. The harassment, the abuse of power, the manipulation of neighborhood law. I sent the security footage, the anonymous threats, the photos, the fines. I didn't use fancy words. I just told the truth. And 2 days later, the truth went viral. The story hit the internet like a match to dry brush. Within hours of my post going live, The headline was splashed across news feeds, podcasts, and even local morning talk shows. HOA president arrested after locking disabled girl in backyard cage. The phrase alone was enough to capture attention, but it was the video clips, grainy footage of Karen wheeling Ellie across our lawn and locking her inside that kennel, that ignited public fury. We were no longer just a family in crisis. We were a symbol. Comments poured in. Thousands of strangers from around the country offered support, donations, and words of solidarity. Some recounted their own HOA horror stories. Others simply demanded justice. The media frenzy swelled, and for the first time in what felt like years, the narrative wasn't being controlled by people like Karen. It was being told by those of us she tried to silence. And the attention had consequences. Philip Green, the interim HOA president, resigned within 48 hours of the story going viral. His public statement, stiff and deflective, tried to distance himself from Karen's actions. But the internet doesn't forget, and someone unearthed a series of emails between him and Karen discussing containment options for problem properties. He was buried under the backlash before the ink on his resignation dried. With the board gutted, Lisa spearheaded a campaign to call an emergency neighborhood vote. "We're dismantling it," she said during a live stream in her garage. "This HOA has become a vehicle for abuse and corruption. We're taking it down, clause by clause, and building something transparent in its place." For the first time, Maplewood Estates didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a revolution. But victory never comes without cost. The trial date for Karen's criminal charges was set, and with it came the summons. I'd have to testify. So would Ellie. My stomach sank when I read the court notice. The idea of putting Ellie through that, sitting in a courtroom, facing the woman who had dehumanized her, felt unbearable. But the alternative was worse, letting Karen slip through the cracks of a system that too often protects the powerful. I sat with Ellie that evening, cradling her hand in mine. "Baby," I said gently, "we might have to go to a place with a judge. A courtroom." Her eyes drifted to the side, then settled on me. "She might be there," I added. "The woman who hurt you." Silence. Just the faint sound of the wind chime outside. Then, almost imperceptibly, Ellie reached forward and touched my necklace, a silver pendant she'd always liked. Her fingers rested on it for a moment, then curled into mine. It wasn't a word, but it was her answer. Court was colder than I expected. Not just the air, but the atmosphere. Everything was gray, sterile, quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of papers or the judge's gavel-tapping wood. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her hair pulled back, face pale and rigid. She looked smaller than I remembered, defeated. But the glint in her eye, the refusal to admit wrongdoing, was still there. She didn't look at Ellie once. When I took the stand, I told the truth. About the ramp. The notices. The campaign of harassment. The cameras. The moment I came home to find my daughter locked in a cage. "She didn't treat my child like a human being," I said, voice cracking. "She treated her like an inconvenience." Karen's attorney tried to frame it differently. Claimed she acted out of concern, suggested the footage was misleading. But no amount of spin could change what the jury saw: a woman dragging a disabled child across a yard and locking her inside a kennel like an animal. When Ellie was wheeled in, the room held its breath. She didn't speak. But she didn't need to. The prosecution played a short video, Ellie laughing under the maple tree, wind chimes singing softly above her. Then they showed the footage of her inside the cage. The contrast was devastating. Even the judge looked shaken. Karen was found guilty on all counts: unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, and criminal trespassing. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with additional probation following her release. It wasn't enough. Nothing ever is. But it was something. When we returned home that evening, the neighborhood felt changed. Yards were a little messy, decorations more personal. The flowers I once got warnings about now bloomed without restriction. And on every corner, there were signs. "We see you, Ellie." Handmade, colorful, covered in drawings and notes from children and adults alike. Ellie smiled at the first one. A real smile. She reached out and touched the paper as we wheeled by. Lisa joined us on the porch, carrying a gift basket, wine, snacks, and a custom-made wind chime engraved with Ellie's name. "We did it," she said simply. I nodded. She did it. But this isn't a story about a happy ending. It's a story about resistance. About how evil doesn't always come with a mask or a weapon. Sometimes it comes with a clipboard and a neighborhood charter. Sometimes it hides behind regulations and smiles and pastel siding. Sometimes it locks your child in a cage and calls it compliance. And sometimes, just sometimes, you fight back. Not with fists, but with truth. With wind chimes. With courage. With one little girl who wouldn't be silenced. 3 months passed. Summer melted into fall, and Maplewood Estates no longer resembled the tidy prison it once was. The hedges grew a little wilder, paint chipped with charming imperfection, and the neighbors no longer greeted each other with wary glances, but with open smiles and honest words. The HOA had officially dissolved. At the final vote, only 3 people voted to keep it intact, 2 of them absentee ballots submitted months ago. With no leadership left to uphold its toxic grip, Maplewood became what it was always supposed to be, a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. Lisa headed up the new community council, an informal, volunteer-based group focused on genuine needs, repaving sidewalks, organizing food drives, and ensuring accessibility for everyone. I served as an advisor, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't look away anymore. Too many of us had stayed silent for too long. Ellie had become the heart of it all. Children came by to play with her in the afternoons, her laughter once again filling the air like birdsong. The neighborhood installed a new swing, specially designed for wheelchairs, and a mural of wind chimes and maple leaves painted across the park wall. Her name was etched at the bottom in delicate, sky-blue cursive. She no longer recoiled when strangers approached. She no longer stared into the middle distance with vacant eyes. Ellie was healing.
So was I.
But healing, like grief, isn't linear. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, convinced I heard the sound of a cage closing. Some days, I'd find myself staring at our fence, wondering how many people watched that day and did nothing. Wondering if I would have done the same had it not been my child. That's the ugliest part of it all, knowing you once believed the illusion of safety, even as it turned to rot beneath your feet. Karen's sentencing hadn't erased that, but something else began to grow in its place, an understanding, a resolve. One night, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast gold across the grass, Lisa joined me by the fire pit. We sat in silence, Ellie nearby in her chair, tracing her fingers along the new wind chime that danced with every breeze. "Do you think she regrets it?" Lisa finally asked.
Karen.
I stared into the flames, the crackle filling the silence. "I think Karen regrets getting caught." Lisa nodded. "That's not the same as remorse." "No," I said. "But it's the only justice we're ever going to get from her." We sat a while longer, letting the fire burn low, the wind chime humming a lullaby behind us. A letter arrived the following week. It was postmarked from the state correctional facility. Karen's handwriting, rigid, precise, curled across the envelope like it was trying to reclaim control. Inside was a single-page letter. No apology. No ownership. Just a string of rationalizations, veiled accusations, and a final line that chilled me to the bone. "You can scrub my name from the records, but you'll never erase my rules. Neighborhoods need order. Remember that." I didn't show Ellie. I didn't keep the letter. I burned it, because Karen was wrong. Order without empathy is not order. It's oppression in disguise. And Ellie? She didn't need Karen's version of order. She didn't need rules that silenced her. She needed a world that listened, that adapted, that welcomed her for who she was, not who she made other people uncomfortable by being. Ellie spoke again that fall. We were walking through the newly opened community garden, hand in hand, the wind chime mural visible through the trees. She stopped, eyes locked on a patch of sunflowers that had bloomed wild across the path. She turned to me and whispered, "Bright." I knelt beside her, tears threatening again. Yes, baby.
Bright.
Her eyes sparkled, wide and alive. She pointed at the sky. Home. I didn't need to ask what she meant. This wasn't just the end of a story. It was the reclamation of one. They say neighborhoods are reflections of values, of community, of silence and sound. Ours had once been a mirror warped by fear, power, and pretense. But when it shattered, something more beautiful emerged. Not perfection, not control, just people, real and raw and trying. And in the middle of it all was a little girl with wind chimes in her heart, reminding us that safety isn't made with fences or rules. It's made with love. It's made with truth. It's made when you refuse to be caged, and when you help others find their way out, too.